Have you ever dealt with a client that was acting more than a little clienty?
It's the client.
They would demand you drop everything to meet at a moment's notice.
Sure, this afternoon works.
He wants to meet now.
Maybe they beat you up over price all the time.
Why does account management cost this much?
They were the type of client whose demands just kept escalating.
You say good, fast, cheap, pick two? Well, I want all three.
If you've ever faced client demands like that, let me be the first to say you are not alone. Client demands are part of agency life after all, but can you and I agree some are more reasonable than others? If you're new to the Agency Life podcast, my name is Logan Lyles and I'm the host of this show. If you're a regular listener, let me also pause to let you know that today's episode will be a little bit different. Instead of sitting down with an agency owner, operations leader, or agency consultant as we normally do, you're going to hear 7 stories from agency folks who, maybe like you, have experienced the most clienty of clients. And be warned, our 6th story from Terry Hoffman may have you shaking your head and wanting to walk away from agency life altogether. I hope not, though. Because if you stick around to the end of the episode, after we're done laughing and maybe crying a little about our peers' all too real experience, I'm going to share 3 things you can do when you feel like a client needs to be stopped.
How do we make money? How do we stop the client?
But maybe they just need to be managed. By the way, if you haven't met Teamwork.com's friendly neighborhood supervillain featured in a few of those opening clips, let me be the first to introduce you to a man who simply goes by 2 words. The client. If you have met him before, what you might not know is that we just released a 2nd installment in this thrilling saga, The Client Part 2. In this new video, you're going to learn the origin story of this all too familiar villain, meet a few new characters, and maybe, just maybe, see a few familiar faces from the original as well. Whether this is your first time meeting the client, or he's been haunting your dreams since we introduced him to the world back in April, I think you're gonna enjoy this. If you head over to teamwork.com/theclient, you can now watch both parts 1 and 2 of The Client. As a bonus, you'll even have the option to sign up to get an email directly from the client himself. He's got some, shall we say, feedback he says you need to hear. Again, that's teamwork.com/theclient, or simply click the link in the episode description for the quickest way to enjoy The Clients, both part 1 and 2. And wait a second. I just got a note from one of my colleagues here. It's actually from the client. He says I need to move things along. This intro is taking a little too long. So I guess that's what we'll do. Let's jump right into our 7 stories of clients acting as clienty as possible. And then we'll get to that list of 3 action items you can take when you face the same clienty behavior in your agency life. First up, you're going to hear from Mark Riggs, founder and CEO of Pemberton, who I chatted with back in May at AMI's Build a Better Agency Summit in my backyard here in Denver, Colorado. Mark's story was about something we've all experienced, endless rounds of revision. But what struck me the most was that this wasn't over a major website redesign or a large brand campaign. The number of revisions reached double digits over a coffee cup.
We were doing a small event in Chicago, and they wanted to put their logo on a mug. And we were going to hand out these mugs to the first 500 people off the train that morning. So our designer slapped the logo on the mug, sent it over for approval. So the first question was, is this the right PMS color? Yep, been working with you for 7 years. We got it right. Could you twist? And the next one was, can you turn it to the left just a little bit? Can you lower it? Before it was over, we had gone back and forth about 10 times on this logo on a mug. And I finally put my foot down and was like, listen, guys, we are wasting so much time. This is not helping us sell what you sell.
Our second story doesn't involve quite as many revisions as that first one, but in Bruce McMeekin's story, these revision requests came after thousands and thousands of mailers had already been printed for the client's campaign. Let's check it out.
A lot of clients end up with time frames and budgets that actually aren't in line with the work that actually needs to be done. A great example is a bank that was being acquired by another bank, and they were waiting for regulatory approval. The regulators were taking their time. This kind of stuff has dates all over it, and 6 times it took. We had printed up thousands and thousands of communications going out to current customers, and 5 of those times they said, sorry, throw it all away. So we threw it all away, did it a 6th time, it finally went out.
All right, on to story number 3 today, which comes from Corey Morris, who I also met up at the Build a Better Agency Summit. Corey is a CEO of a Missouri-based agency, Voltage. In this quick clip, he shares a pivotal moment that happened after the work had been completed and the client got an invoice they weren't ready for.
We had a brand new client came on, signed a small project scope, one of the nicest people we ever worked with. We get to a point where they want a whole bunch more. Money is not an issue for us. He's like, no, I'm good. Let's do time and materials. Checking in every other day with milestones where we are turning stuff live, turning stuff over to the client. And then they get the first end of the month invoice. And suddenly there was a budget. And suddenly there's a freak out.
What was your main takeaway from that?
First off, I'm proud that we could account for every hour. We used teamwork and we had every minute tracked. So I had an objective way to call his bluff, but we are very keen on pointing out why to the client when they might want to make a decision or cut a corner, why we need to do it that way, and to bring some of these pain stories from their side and our side in an honest way forward.
Whew. Seems like Corey's team saved themselves by being able to audit the tasks they'd completed and that time tracking data within teamwork.com, but I'm sure those conversations with that client in the middle of their freakout were still no walk in the park. All right, I don't even want to think about that one anymore. It's kind of making my skin crawl. Let's move on to stories 4 and 5 that are all about clients making demands that were either financially or strategically unreasonable. First, let's hear from a repeat guest, Kyle Duford, president of the Brand Leader.
During our growth phase, and we started moving from, dropping those 10% of old clients and then hiring bigger new ones. And so in that phase, we had some older clients that were paying us $1,500 a month and were asking us to do more for them hourly or whatever than our larger, higher clients were paying us literally 20 times that. So that was a big growing pain. We had to lop them off. And it was hard to say to the local restaurant, we're not going to do that thing for you because your kid tried to update the website and screwed it up.
And I'm sure you've never had a client ask you to fix something that they messed up like Kyle did, right? If you're a web development agency and you're watching on YouTube, let us know in the comments if you've ever experienced something like that. All right, on to story number 5, as promised, where we hear from Mike Midgley, CEO of 1630 Digital, and his story about client demands that have everything to do with who is the true expert in the room.
They've got a very distinctive view of how their brand or product should be displayed. And they always look at it through the lens of what they have as personal preferences, whereas they never seem to look at it through their own ICP or persona. So when we used to issue feedback, we create the content, we do all the design, and literally they became the expert in the room. And they lost sight of it being for their reader as opposed to for them. And then, 1 or 2 words goes to 1 or 2 sentences, 1 or 2 sentences eventually is the paragraph. And they end up rewriting it. It takes 3 months to get a set of content out there.
I have to say, Mike is so right there. It's tough to get things done when there are way too many experts in the room. Next, I want to share our 6th and maybe most disturbing story that came from Terry Hoffman, founder and CEO of Marketing Refresh. I don't even know how to tee this one up. I'm just going to let you hear from Terry directly on this one.
I would characterize it as just violated a lot of the boundaries that are important to us to set with a client in the overall way the relationship is managed and run and the way that my team is treated. So I think we've all dealt with the client who goes to the 4th round of edits or approvals when only 2 are allowed and you have that file named final. This one was very different than that. This was more about violating maybe some of our values and ethics. In fact, this client can be found right now on HBO. There is a docu-series being done about them. It's for the largest festival of its kind in the entire world. They were a dream client, seemingly, for our agency to get. But we did a tour of the festival grounds and found out that there was naked Jenga being played at the campfire during the evening with a bunch of the festival guests. The owner of the event had us call him by a certain title that was really strange. And if you watch the documentary, you're going to see what I'm talking about.
Wow. All right. I don't think we can top that one. So to round things out today, we're going to go to one more conversation I had at the Denver event we mentioned earlier and let you hear from Jerry Gennaria, president and CEO of Toki, about a time a client had every right to be upset, but the agency still managed to maintain the relationship I couldn't even believe it.
I was early in my career as a creative director working with an account manager, and we had a client that sometimes just didn't get it. And I think mostly it was a factor of not having the time to really read the emails, but it could get a little bit frustrating. And in this one particular instance, she just wasn't getting it. And the account manager sent an email saying, would someone just buy this client a clue? I'll contribute the first $5. But she didn't realize that what she had really done is replied to the email that the client had sent. Needless to say, it created quite a little bit of stir with the client.
Did you keep that client?
We did actually keep the client.
Wow. I still can't believe they kept that client after that unfortunate email exchange. All right. As promised, we wanted to do more with this episode than simply give you some relatable and entertaining stories, as fun as that was. We want to share those 3 action items you can take away from this episode and put into practice in your own agency life. Before we get to those, I have to pause just to give a quick thank you to each of our contributors to today's episode. We couldn't have made this special fun episode happen without your willingness to share your own stories of clients acting clienty. That being said, we've linked to each of these guests' LinkedIn profiles in the episode description. So if you're headed there to get that link we mentioned earlier to teamwork.com/theclient, take a second to connect with these folks as well, because we're all better at agency life when we're in it together. Now, on to those 3 takeaways. Number 1, maintain good documentation. As we learned from Mark's story about the coffee mug and Bruce's story about printing the thousands and thousands of mailers, we saw that not having clear documentation on the details of your service delivery can lead to a lot of wasted time. With that in mind, I've got 2 questions for you. Are your SOPs clearly documented with your internal team and shared with your clients, like many of our Teamwork.com customers use our notebooks to do? Number 2, are you logging email communication with your clients in your CRM like HubSpot so that there's a quote-unquote paper trail of the communication that's taken place? If you answered no to either of those 2 questions, I want to encourage you to take a few steps to get your digital documentation in order this week. It may just save you when a client asks for that extra round of revisions or says, "I never said that," when you bring up a previous email exchange. Number 2, maintain your position of expertise. As Kyle's story about the low-paying client and Mike's retelling of the client who was the only expert in the room both showed us, if the only way you are managing client demands is by saying yes all the time, then you'll quickly be relegated to the lowest level of work that you're executing for that client. You won't be seen as a strategic advisor. You'll be cemented in their minds as a replaceable agency. And while you may retain those clients, you'll find it very hard to turn those client demands into actual profit for your agency. On this note, I'd encourage you to check out our recent episode with Max Traylor. It was titled "Stop Selling Implementation Services and Do This Instead." Max gives some very practical advice in that episode on how to get out of what we refer to in the episode as the tactician's trap and become valued and paid as the strategic consultant that your team is. If you missed that episode, check it out by clicking the link in the video if you're watching on YouTube, or the link in the show notes if you're listening to the audio version of this podcast. All right, number 3, maintain a safe distance when you need to. Sometimes you've just got to run. As much as we here at Teamwork.com want to help you manage as many instances of clients being clienty, sometimes there's nothing left for you to do but get out. If you find yourself in a situation like Terry described, where client demands become abusive or unethical, it's no longer time to manage the client. As she says, it's time to run.
If your value system is being violated or ethics are being violated, don't just walk away. Run and leave skid marks.
It's also worth pointing out that Mike had similar advice for when you get that sneaking suspicion about a bad fit client early on.
Don't take on the wrong clients, turn away the money. Whatever you make out of that client will cost you 10 times more in the hassle.
All right, fantastic advice from both Terry and Mike there. And that actually wraps up my list of 3 ways to manage client situations when clients are acting clienty. But I've got one more thing I think you might find helpful. When we invited agency owner Jackie Hermes on the podcast to talk about dealing with the most clienty of clients, similar to Mike's advice that we just heard, we ended up talking for 45 minutes about how to avoid taking on those clients that would be prone to extreme clientiness in the first place. Again, if you want to check out that episode, just click the link in the video if you're watching on YouTube, or the link in the description if you're listening to the audio version. And make sure you're subscribed and have the notification bell on so you can catch our next episode with Guy Bauer, founder of Umalt, our video agency and partner who helped bring the client to life. He's going to join me here on the show on the 22nd to share what he's discovered as the real reason clients become unhappy that often leads to clienty behavior. It's a great one you won't want to miss.